Now we are up to kindness. Who has kindness? 5. I did, and I hope I do, said Eric Topper, one of the guys who sat right next to me in class at school. By which I mean that I hope I show it to others enough so you know it's real. Kindness is another of those things you can't fake. You either treat other people without being mean and snarly, or you don't. Like when you tell your aunt that her hat looks good even if the rest of her clothes are weird. Except for the times when you are just trying to survive without getting smacked, kindness is pretty much out there for everyone else to see, or not to see. Now, I thought about this one for 2 or 3 days, trying to figure out what would be the best story from the Bible. Finally, my dad suggested that I look in one of the books in the Old Testament that tells the story of King David. And that's where I found my example in the 9th chapter of 2 Samuel. According to the Bible, Saul was the first king of the nation of Israel, and Jonathan was his son. Jonathan was also David's best friend. When David and Jonathan were young men, they spent a lot of time together. But during one of the wars between the Philistines and the Israelites, Jonathan was killed. A few years later, David himself became the king of Israel. One day, according to 2 Samuel chapter 9 verse 1, he remembered his best friend and asked his own servants, "Is there yet any that is left of the house of Saul, that I may shew him kindness for Jonathan's sake?" When he was told that Jonathan's son, Mephibosheth, was still alive, David sent his servants to bring him and his family to David's house. David then gave land to him and told Mephibosheth's servants to help him farm it. He also told his own servants to sit Mephibosheth at his own table at mealtime so that he ate his meals with David's family for the rest of his life. This was kindness at its best, way above the call of duty and honor. Mr. Morgan waited a moment or two before he responded. "Thank you, Eric," he finally said. "That's an amazing story. Does anyone have any questions? Anything to add?" Nobody did, so he went on. "Next up is goodness. Who has goodness?" 6. This time, Cake's hand shot up again. "We didn't have enough people last week, so I took two of them," she said. "I think goodness, as it's used here in the Bible, is the partner to the one that went before, kindness. I think it's like I said about joy and peace. The first is out in the open where others can see it. The second is inside where it's not so visible. So kindness is what you show to others based on the goodness you have inside." She waited a few seconds to see if anyone had any questions, then went on. "Now, as far as a biblical example is concerned, I found what I was looking for in Mark chapter 12, verses 41 through 44. This passage tells about a woman who put all the money she had into the offering box in the temple for helping other people. She threw in 2 mites, which would be a very tiny amount in modern money. I guess maybe a penny or two, but it was all she had. Here's what Jesus said about her in verses 43 and 44. "And he called unto him his disciples, and said unto them, Verily I say unto you, that this poor widow hath cast more in than all they which have cast into the treasury. For all they did cast in of their abundance, but she of her want did cast in all that she had, even all her living." This woman put her money in the box to do good for other people. And I think that doing good things simply because you want to is the best possible example of how goodness should work in the real world. By the time Cake finished talking, people were nodding all over the room, Mr. Morgan included. "Not much I can add to that," he finally said. "Who's next with faithfulness?" 7. The girl who had that one, I didn't know her name, spoke in such a monotone it was hard to hear what she was saying, but I managed to figure it out. "I think it means being faithful to other people, not giving up on them, not double crossing them, not running away when they are in trouble," she said. "It's like how your mother takes extra care of you when you feel sick, even though it might be a lot easier to close the door and leave you alone." "That's good," said Mr. Morgan. "Anything else? Anyone other than ourselves and our friends we should be faithful to?" My hand went up and I found myself talking with Mr. Morgan's permission almost in spite of my original intent to keep my mouth shut. I think faithfulness to God also plays a big part in all this. You can't be faithful to others if you are unfaithful to Him, because that's where it starts. To this day, I still don't know where that came from. It just seemed right, and I think I surprised not only myself, but Cake Baker and a few others as well. Mr. Morgan couldn't seem to stop nodding. Yes, yes, that's exactly right. What was your name again? Delbert? Deli? Either way, I think you made a terrific point. So often we talk about faithfulness as though it's only a measure of how faithful we are to our friends and our family, or how faithful they are to us. But it starts with God. He's faithful to us no matter what, and we can learn to be faithful to Him and to others by following His example. For a moment I thought Cake Baker would bust out crying. She looked so proud and happy to have me there. The only problem for me is that I still can't explain where I got what I said, and yet the minute it came out of my mouth I knew it was true. Plus, a lot of stuff that happened to me later on, long after I got older and learned what it meant to have faithful friends, seemed to just come to me in the same way. On the other hand, grew up is not really a good term to use with me, since I never got much bigger, but I definitely got older. Finally, the girl who'd introduced this subject spoke up in a much stronger voice, using a story from the very beginning of the Bible. I think that what Deli said is also what I meant to say, because I want to take my example from chapters 6, 7, and 8 from Genesis, and those are all about Noah. He was more faithful to God than anyone else on the earth at that time. All the others had turned their backs on God and were so wicked that in order to keep the human race from becoming totally sinful, God had to destroy all the evil people and start over with Noah. So God told Noah to build a boat big enough to hold his whole family, plus two each of all the animals on earth. I think you all know the rest of the story, how the rains came, how Noah and his family floated in the ark, how it settled onto the top of a mountain, and how the rains and the floods finally stopped and the land dried out again. But that's not the main point here. What really matters is how faithful to God Noah was. God told him what to do, and Noah did it, even though with his own eyes he could see no need to build such a huge boat. Yet he believed God and stayed faithful to Him. You can be sure that many of his neighbors laughed at him and called him a fool, but Noah's faithfulness paid off in a big way. In the end, when Noah and his family came out of the ark onto dry land, Noah built an altar and worshipped God. In Genesis chapter 8, verses 21 and 22, God then said, "And the Lord said in his heart, I will not again curse the ground any more for man's sake, for the imagination of man's heart is evil from his youth. Neither will I again smite any more everything living as I have done. While the earth remained, seed time and harvest and cold and heat and summer and winter, and day and night shall not cease." I would say that Noah did all of us a huge favor by showing God that at least one human being plus his family could make his worthwhile for God to give us all a second chance simply by being faithful to Him. At that point, we had just two more fruits to go: gentleness and self control. The girl who dealt with gentleness covered the subject in a very quick, clear summary.